Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe. I'm your friendly neighborhood leadership expert specializing in the people stuff. I like to think of myself as a team navigator. I work with teams and team leaders to move from frustrated, stuck in endless conversations going nowhere to high energy, fast flowing, high performers. I like to help teams figure out where they're going and how they're going to get there without killing each other. Yeah, sometimes it's as basic as that. Well, my question for you today is, are you looking for some good news? Really? There's so much bad news around. War, pestilence, you name it. Polarization. Well, my guest today really was a surprising delight for me because he came full of good news. Lots of great news, actually, in terms of leadership. His name is John Davis. He is the chair of Brand New View, a global leadership development and organization transformation firm. He works directly with CEOs and leaders around the world. He's got an enormous amount of business. So he started off in business when he was still studying at university, started up a couple of different companies, and then went on to be parts of big businesses and ended up teaching as a professor in many different universities, including a number of years in Singapore. He's written 11 books. 11. That's right. It surprised me when he told me. I'm like, oh my God. His latest one is called Radical Business: How to Transform Your Organization in the Age of Global Crisis. It's very timely, it's very apt, and it's incredibly inspiring to hear about the stories of organizations who have chomped down on goodwill and good purpose and changed their businesses for the benefit of people and planet. Oh, very uplifting. So without further ado, let's do it. Yeehaw, all the way from Oregon. Welcome to the show, John Davis.
Thanks, Zoe. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to meet somebody else who has fiction aspirations as well as 11 books in the nonfiction area. So just a little professional jealousy there. That's pretty amazing. So before we talk about your latest nonfiction book and maybe talk a bit about your fiction book as a preview and encouraging you to get it out into the world, just saying, I would love to know how you actually got to this point in time in your career. Like, I love the journey of the individual to how they showed up here. So what was your starting point and how did you end up doing this kind of work?
Oh, wow. What a great question. And do we have like 6 hours? No. So, it's really funny. So the end point, or where I am right now, the current point, is absolutely not where I intended my career to go. But, even when I started out my career, it probably wasn't where I intended to start it. I came from an academic family. So all my parents, my grandparents, both my brothers, my aunts and uncles were all professors. And I did not want to get into the family business. So when I left university, I'd already started a couple of businesses in university and I wanted to get better at that. And so I went purposely into business because I just wanted to avoid the whole professorship route.
So you started business while you were at university? Like that's really busy. What were you studying, business, or what were you studying?
No, in fact, they didn't have an undergraduate business major where I studied. I studied political science. But no, I was just interested. I had a group of friends that were interested in the same things I was. There was one of the dormitories had a restaurant that had been moribund. Nobody was using it. So we made a pitch to the student council to say, hey, we'd love to take it over and turn it into a pizza restaurant for students on campus. They said, sure, why not? So we used it for a year and built a little pizza business. And then at the same time, got interested in managing local student bands, rock bands. And so we started to manage those and booked them in clubs around the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I was going to university. And both those businesses kind of gave some cash in the pocket, which, college students want. It was really fun. I enjoyed it.
Wow. Okay. So you're at uni, you're studying poli-sci, and then
studying poli-sci. Then I went into business and I spent several years in business in several different sectors. I was in the hospitality sector, working for 4-star, 4-diamond hotels. Then I went back to graduate school, got my MBA. Then I joined Nike for a number of years and led their outdoor group there, which was really fun. And then from Nike, got into high tech and actually, well, also started a small boutique resort company. Yeah. So see, you asked a simple question. It's a long answer. Anyway, to make a long story short, around about 2000, I was giving a talk at the University of Washington in Seattle, and they invited me to start teaching. And so I started teaching in their executive MBA and their technology management MBA programs. So the whole thing I had tried to avoid for most of my life up to that point, I ended up getting into. And I absolutely loved it. And that led to an invitation to go to Singapore Management University in Singapore, where I was in Singapore for nearly 20 years, actually 16 years, and became a professor of practice there at Singapore Management University, then became a dean at the SB Jain School of Global Management, then joined Duke University here from North America, but they had an office in Asia that was focused on executive education. So I helped lead that business for a number of years and got into executive education, and that's what I'm doing now is leadership development and working with leaders of various companies. And it's been the last 20 years have really enabled me to do that. Wow, that was such a long answer.
Okay. Well, that is quite an adventure, I have to say, quite an adventurous career trajectory, which is really cool. And your latest book, Radical Business, How to Transform Your Organization in the Age of Global Crisis, is perfectly timed, I reckon. Well done. So the one question I had about this, it's often assumed that we know what the global challenges are. So let's get that on the table first. What, as your research and experience said, are the global challenges that businesses are facing?
Okay, well, they're the pretty obvious ones in front of all of us right now. And it sounds like an easy question, but there are a lot of adjacent problems attached to them. So if you look at the most substantial thing we face right now, the climate crisis globally is one. But secondly, the pandemic the last couple of years has taught us all as a planet how to sort of react differently to that. There are social and economic injustice issues that have been pervasive for a number of decades now. Food insecurity is, of course, coming up again, and now water insecurity as we start to look at the drying climate. So a number of those issues sound almost abstract away from business, but they're central to business, as we are now witnessing, and particularly brought to life by the war in Ukraine, where we're seeing all the after effects and ramifications of the challenges with Ukraine's grain harvests and which countries they go to the supply chain backups that were started by the pandemic but exacerbated because of the war. So a lot of big problems, and they do actually have direct impact on what our businesses do. So to the point of the book, one of the things that came out of the conversations with leaders, because I've spent the last 15, 20 years talking to CEOs and leaders in over 40 countries, is they were keen to a person to find ways to actually be more involved in society and the communities they serve above and beyond their fiduciary responsibilities. And they had sort of a common regret. So I wanted to use this book as a way to help businesses realize that they can actually positively impact the world.
That last part of your sentence really surprised me. You said they all had in common, and I was expecting, how do we actually deal with this crisis? And you came back with, they actually want to make a bigger contribution. I'm like, wow. That is not what I expected to hear out of your experience. So I am curious about that.
Yeah.
Because that takes a certain type of leader to be positioned to say, I want to make a difference in society. It takes a particular stage of leadership maturity and resources and resourcefulness to do that. So this is my assumption about leaders who are positioned to do that and respond in that way. The leaders that you are working with who are saying, yeah, we want to make a difference and make a contribution, what do they have in common? Is it their experience base? Is it the size of their business, the nature of their business, the fact that they're on the global stage? What are the common things?
Yeah, it's a good series of characteristics you've identified there. It's that, and it's also the experience base that they bring to sort of the laser focus most of them have if they're publicly traded CEOs with dealing with the quarterly pressures of reporting numbers and ensuring the business stays on track for the benefit of shareholders. And it took years of sort of experience in that path for them to recognize that the shareholder enhancement and the profit maximization agendas that are the common sort of foundation of most business definitions of success turn out to be inadequate to satisfying what they ultimately want to achieve, right? So they start thinking about legacy issues. And they start thinking about, well, what is it beyond just me showing that I've increased earnings per share 3 cents this quarter? What are the other things that I think would be actually impactful and meaningful? And they start thinking about things like leadership systems. How do we develop a cadre of leaders that follow me that can actually live by the virtues I believe in my head, but haven't been able to practice. And that to me was interesting. And Zoe, another point in there too, is it wasn't universal, but it was a majority. So there were many leaders, I should say, who just, they were focused on putting their stake in the ground. They were a great financial leader. They knew how to cut costs. They knew how to tap the financial levers in order to make the business run on all the proper tracks. But the ones that really stood out were the ones who said, yeah, and there's this larger itch I'd like to scratch, and I wish I'd done a better job of it, but I was so absorbed in the day-to-day that in retrospect, it's something I'd like to leave as a legacy for other people to start to adopt.
John, that just made me so excited. The fact that this group of people you're working with, they're not just leading edge, that they're a groundswell. That is so exciting. So I've been working in the leadership development space for, 20 odd years. And for the last 15 of them, I've been working with the leadership developmental models and talking about the leading edge of mindset and values around globalism, environmentalism, inclusivity, and diversity, sort of those more holistic values, comprehensive values. And we started to see it play out on a bigger stage with things like the B plan, the different organizations saying exactly what you're talking about. It's the quadruple bottom line, not just the returns to shareholders, et cetera. That's the most important. So if that's becoming more common, that means we're getting close to a tipping point in terms of changing or expanding the leadership maturity of a broader spectrum of people across our society, which is super, super exciting.
Yeah, and can I offer another point in there too, Zoe? Because you asked about across different sectors and businesses. So some of these businesses were $15-20 billion in revenues. They were quite large. Others were half a billion, so they're smaller businesses. But all of them had some sort of a cross-national presence, either a regional MNC or a global MNC. But they were cross sector, so it wasn't specific to consumer product or high tech or anything else. It was a number of different sectors, and that to me was the most uplifting aspect to this. That I agree with you. I think it's nice for the world to know that there are people thinking about these things. Yeah,
that there's some and more, and it's growing, which is so, it's like the best news I've had all day. So thank you so much. It's very inspiring me to hear that because, to say, you're not just a unicorn when you start to take this on board. It's part of it's becoming business as usual. So let's talk about how your book is in service to and in assistance to those leaders who are ready for that, who are ready to want to make a contribution and want to capitalize on crisis and initiate transformation. So I saw in the book summary that when we capitalize on global in crisis and we turn to innovation and transform our businesses, those businesses are the ones that are successful. So I get that as a principle. There's nothing like they say, don't waste a good crisis. I can't remember who said that. This famous person.
A lot of people take ownership of that.
Okay. Yeah. Famous quote claimed by many. So let's talk about the book. So you've got 3 principles: value meaning, value measure, and value mobilization. So when you're talking about how to transform your organization, transformation is a massive word as well. What kind of appetite do you need going into that kind of concept?
So good question. And I want to position it this way. The bottom line is it needs to be a big appetite. And here's why. What has occurred over the past 2 or 3 decades in the area of sustainability, for example, has been approaching sustainability from how to become less unsustainable, right? That's what businesses have been doing, trying to find ways to be less damaging, right? And that's a good start. But now we need to be in a position where we're actually moving toward how do we become more sustainable. And the difference between those is stark and critical, because in the old 20th century model, businesses were designed around a certain set of principles about what it took to be successful. A lot of those principles continue to this day, but the world has moved on to what they expect success to now be. And that success is defined around these much larger initiatives of don't just make me great widgets, make me great widgets responsibly in a way that I can feel proud to buy your widgets, right? And that means that those 3 areas of value meaning, value measure, and value mobilization are really critical for any business to undertake now. So what's value meaning? It's simply the aspiration. What is it? What's our guiding star? It's like purpose, but a bigger version of purpose, because it's what do we ultimately envision as our idealistic view of what our organization really contributes to humankind. value measure is, how do we determine that we're actually on track toward what we want to achieve? And by the way, being on track is too often looked at as a financial set of metrics. Yes, those are important, but those are a byproduct of doing three other things well, which I can talk about with you, but three other measures in addition to financial. And then the third area, value mobilization, is then how do you bring the different communities together? So there's the stakeholders, it's how you engage with your stakeholders, it's the environment you create, plus the infrastructure of your actual environments where you operate, and then ultimately how you innovate towards solutions that are actually relevant to the biggest challenges that we face today. So that's sort of a big all-encompassing way to look at those three major themes. But I'm happy to break it down further and talk about the value measure or any of those things in there.
Yeah. Well, God, there's lots of juicy stuff in here. So societal or social aspiration, what kinds of activities or guiding questions do you have people around that? Like, how do you get people started thinking about that if they haven't done a lot of their thought beyond how do I actually just keep the doors open and the lights on?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I structured the book the way I did, is because I wanted businesses that are finding this intimidating to realize it's not that intimidating, but there are principles and practices and models in place that you are fully aware of that you're probably not executing on very well. And I give examples of how to do that and organizations doing that. And so the point behind that is to say any business, whether those motivated leaders who are already in this thinking space wanting to do this, and those who are really reticent or even cynical about it, there is a path forward to make them do this that I lay out in the book. It's by no means the only prescriptive approach, but it is an approach that works because I've got evidence in the book that shows that it works. And so there are some heartening lessons that the leaders can take from that. And I think the powerful thing out of that is to recognize that if you start with the beginning, which is what is our aspiration as an organization? And aspiration often sounds fluffy, it sounds ethereal, it sounds abstract, it sounds like this type of stuff you think about when you've got time, and people often deride it. But it's actually powerfully important because in times of crisis, when your business is going down the tubes, things are struggling, the last thing you're going to focus on is how to increase earnings per share by a penny. What you need to focus on are the principles of the business and why you're there in the first place, because that's what rallies employees to want to feel like they're part of something special, to contribute towards resolutions that help solve some of those big challenges.
Okay. So it's dream big, make it meaningful.
Yep.
Okay. So let's dig into measurement, which I just did a workshop yesterday with an organization about with their strategic plan and developing measures. So financial is one, right? So it's a lag measure, not a lead measure of success. And also depends on how you define success. What's your approach to measurement? What should organizations be looking at?
Yeah, so I agree with that principle that it is a lag measure, not a lead measure. And unfortunately, in too many business schools, we still sort of teach it indirectly as a lead measure because ultimately you want to achieve certain financial objectives. But because it's a lag measure, you have to understand what the antecedents are. And so one of them is reputation value. And reputation value, in a big way, is just to think about what does it take to build trust with your stakeholders, with the communities that you serve. And that is be really simplistic. And there's a lot more detail to this, but to be really simplistic, it simply means delivering on the promises that you make, right? Or hopefully over-delivering. But there's a lot of nuance to that, right? Because you can make BS promises and it's light and easy, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about substantial promises that are actually operationally important to the larger problems that the businesses are trying to solve. So reputation value is trust. Organization value is the next value, and that is internal to the company. And that is, do people inside feel like their work matters? Because if they feel like their work matters and that they're contributing to a greater good, some larger cause, they're also going to contribute discretionary effort, right? You and I know in leadership circles, when you're working with people who are switched on and feel like their work has resonance and meaning, they're likely to put forth effort above and beyond the call of duty because they just believe in the mission. They believe in whatever it is. So that organizational value is a really important internal metric that you have to start to tap into. And we could talk about organizational designs and whatnot. The third area is societal value, and that's the external lens, and that's the external metric, and that is, are you truly engaged with the communities you serve? Not just by giving jobs in local markets, which is great. That's really important. Employment is important. It creates economic vitality and helps lift people out of dire situations, creates a middle class and whatnot. But there's more. Because if you want people in that community where your business is based by their permission and by government regulatory permission, then you have to demonstrate some level of care and concern that says, we're here in this community as a community actor along with you. We're not just here as a corporate entity that's sort of faceless, that people disappear into during the day and leave at night. But in fact, we are a vital part of whatever's taking place in the community. And you can look at a whole pantheon of different ways companies can get involved, but that sincere approach to being more genuinely involved is absolutely critical. Those three things, the reputation, the societal and organizational values, then lead to what you mentioned, which is the financial value and the outcomes.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. So those are really important aspects of measurement and how organizations might think about their contribution and track their progress against it. Can you give us an example of organizations that are doing this well in terms of being good community citizens, contributors, and any examples of organizations that are doing poorly with that from your point of view?
Yeah, so great. So one of the organizations I highlight in the book is called Siam Cement Group, SCG, out of Thailand. And you may think, well, gosh, what's a cement company doing that's making this kind of an impact in society? Well, they're a 100-year-old firm that has, as its name suggests, has been in an extraction business for all that 100 years, cement, chemicals, things like that. And they are at a pivotal point, as a lot of these extraction firms are. And that is, we know that there's damage that's being caused by the work that we do. What do we do to be a thriving, ongoing entity in the years going forward, given what's going on in the world? And so they're working very hard to create much more of a digital enterprise long term. But short term, they're practicing experimentation techniques, test and learn techniques that are very antithetical to the way they've always done things, which are typically 10 to 20-year engineering planning horizons. Now they're doing things like 30-day sprints and whatnot. But that's sort of the mechanics of it. They got involved in society, and they've always done this, but when the pandemic hit a couple of years ago, the CEO, a gentleman by the name of Koen Roengroot, and I feature him in the book, and we spent a lot of time talking, but he was deeply concerned because everything, as we know, worldwide shut down. And in Thailand was no different. And he reached out to AstraZeneca and to Oxford, which were putting together the vaccine. And he reached out to them and said, look, we know we've got a problem. We don't know what the resolution of the problem is. We want to be a conduit to helping solve it, particularly here in Southeast Asia, and we could start in Thailand. We will provide our facilities for manufacturing for the vaccine as you develop it. We're here to help do that in the local communities across Thailand. And we'll do it at no profit. We'll just do it because it's important for society. Now, SCG's business had effectively, like many, slowed to even shut down because of the pandemic. But nevertheless, they focused their efforts and attention on creating the production capacity through their existing operations to produce the vaccine so they could be distributed quickly across Thailand. And that, to me, and they're well known in Thailand, but that level of sort of direct contribution to society in a way that gets to the heart of people's fears, right, health and whatnot, was a really powerful way for them to further burnish their credentials as a company that cares.
I love that story. And what occurs to me also is similar to what we're talking about. You need to be at a certain leadership maturity stage to be thinking in this way. You also have to have enough resources to be able to do that. Because there are plenty of smaller organizations or larger organizations that did not have the financial robustness to even consider anything like that. And they were busy, slashing and burning staff, cutting expenses, let alone thinking about how can I contribute to society. So do you think that's a critical, important aspect of being an organization that can make a contribution, that you need to have those brass tacks of financial robustness in place first? Or can you build that into your raison d'etre and your methodology from the ground up?
You can build it into your raison d'etre for sure, because, and the reason why I stress that is, yes, it's helpful to have the financial and tax levers and structures in place to do that, but those can also become a prison, because you can argue that, well, we can't quite adjust those levers yet because we have certain expectations with shareholders. You can go down the list of financial obstacles that might arise that you can use as a block for going down the path of sustainability in the first place. And that leads you down the path of never quite getting there, because you're always kicking the can down the proverbial road. And that's always a problem. So yes, I think if you start to look at it back in that standpoint of aspiration and purpose, then you can start to say, look, our reason is more than just the things we produce or the services we sell. here's our objective. If we do this well, here's the benefit of the impact we can have on society in this territory or in this country or in this city or this location. And here's why that's really important. And oh, by the way, that also opens up the conversation we need to have with our value chain partners. Because if we think that this is important, and as you know, in sustainability circles, they call it scope 1, 2, and 3 sustainability levels. Scope 1 is direct to the company. The company can be really, really well thought out in the way it approaches those kinds of issues. But at scope 2, its partners, and scope 3, sort of the adjacent businesses, aren't also practicing it, then you're not necessarily solving a big chunk of the problem. So you need to have those partners also a part of this. And if your reason to exist says this is important to us, then it ought to be obviously a part of your values, and those values ought to be shared with your business partners. And that's what we're seeing in many cases. I mean, can I give one more example?
Sure.
So there's a Danish energy company called Ørsted. And Ørsted, for most of its life, has been a fossil fuels company, but at about 2009, 85%, by the way, up until 2009, 85% of their business was fossil fuels. They wanted to pivot to 85% renewables, which they have done.
God, that's major. That's a major change.
It's huge. And they had all kinds of pushback. There's great stories in the press about it. I mean, great stories in that you can read the whole history of this. You know, they had shareholders who were upset, they had customers who were upset, they had employees who were upset, but they were really focused on how do we go from a fossil fuel dependent organization to renewable energies. When they made the transition, they're now 85% renewable energies for 4 years in a row. Now, 2019 to 2022, they have been rated the #1 most sustainable energy company in the world. And that to me says an awful lot about that capacity to overcome the resistance, to deal with a range of stakeholders, to stick to a plan, to focus on an aspiration and a reason to exist that says energy is good, but the ways we develop energy can be improved. And they just push their way through it. And their market capitalization has more than doubled in the last decade. So there's financial rewards out of that as well. And that, just one other point, that you asked me about businesses that aren't doing it as well. I won't name company names, but I will tell you there are many others in that same sector of energy that aren't doing that same level of commitment, that could be doing it. But right now it's too enticing to just drive profits up. It's easy, right? And we're seeing it, with petrol prices worldwide.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as you're talking about if you're going to go from 85% carbon-based products to 85% renewables, that's pretty massive, big shift and lots of resistance, as you say. I'm thinking about a lot of the organizations here in Australia that are mining-based. Say, for example, like coal power is a big industry in Australia. And there's been decades of conversation about we can't shut down coal because the communities will fold. And that's the pushback, and it's a political pushback, it's an economic pushback, and it's a social pushback. And so it's really interesting to hear the case for a Dutch company to be able to do it. I'm wondering, because the Dutch company, I'm not sure, do they have their operations in Europe? Where are their operations? First of all, a technical question.
Most of them are in Europe. So yeah, I mean, they've got a big base there.
So the types of communities affected by their work and their change of work are more fluid, I'm thinking, than the ones here in Australia, which are often very remote, small communities. Do you think that has an impact on how change can be affected in this way?
Sure, of course it does. I mean, because they've got a large concentration of easy access and people who can quickly be converted to why this is beneficial, right? And smaller communities, it is harder. But there's another organization that is actually dealing exactly with that challenge, the smaller communities, and helping deal with any of the UN's 17 sustainability development goals. And they're also out of Europe. They're called Norsken. It's Norrsken. And they are an incubator for startups that focus only on solving any of those 17 UN SDGs. And they now have over 600 entrepreneurs between Sweden, where they're based, and Kigali in Africa, where they have another incubation center that's helping to solve really intractable problems in Central and Northern Africa. And what's interesting about that is earlier you talked about unicorns. Remember at the beginning, and in Silicon Valley and in high-tech parlance, we know a unicorn is a company with $1 billion valuation. But what Norsken focuses on are impact unicorns. And those are companies that want to positively impact 1 billion lives. And that is incredibly exciting. And it gets to the core of what you're driving at, which is even in outlying communities, what are the ways that you can help benefit them, whether it's access to water, portable toilets in really out of the way locations, whatever it might be, any of those sustainability development goals. Norskin and many others, but Norskin is a great example of an organization that's doing that. And they were founded only in 2016, so they're really new. And they've got 600 plus entrepreneurs and 50 businesses.
John, that was my second piece of exciting news that's actually put tears to my eyes. Whether I'm just tired because I'm smashing hard to get to my 2 weeks of leave in the desert tomorrow, or whether, well, part of it's that, and part of it is I'm so inspired. Like impact unicorns, that is just huge. You know, people who are aspiring to affect 1 billion lives. Oh, I'm getting choked up again just talking about it. That is incredibly inspiring that's happening, and that there's organizations that are funding those startups, that there's enough startups who are focused on making that difference. I think that's really moving.
It's encouraging. It's encouraging for sure.
Absolutely. So for one of the questions, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about solving today's crises? It's one of the questions that is associated with your book. How do you answer that question in your book?
Yeah, so I answer it by saying there's no simple answer.
Come on. Here's the silver bullet, please, and the magic pill.
I know it. It's like, because as I mentioned, in the early part of my career, I spent a lot of time in marketing and whatnot, and people always say, well, what's the magic to marketing? It's like, you throw up your hands and go, a lot of, good luck. In this context, the book is really designed to be a blueprint that is easy enough for people to follow, to say, what would I need to do structurally to think about how to address whatever problem is important to us? Because it's important for the company to identify what is important to them, what's kind of within their skill set, if they're going to, tackle this at all. And the reality of it is, if a company chooses not to pursue any sort of force for good transformation, the reality of it is the market's going to overwhelm them, and they will be overtaken by competitors who are going to see the opportunities there. So it's really not a choice. It's just a matter of timing. And so the book is a way to say, look, if you want to really approach this, whatever the problem is, you've really got to step back and say, again, what's our aspiration? What is it we think we are here to do? And then look at what's going to make us distinctive in pursuit of that. Because those two things alone will help us define the kinds of talent we need, or we need to supplement our organization with, in order to pursue that, and ultimately the kinds of experiences we need to create for companies. Now, I know I'm talking in very generic terms here, but you need to have that strategic big picture in front of you before you can even tackle how do we get to the particulars of solving something like Kuhn Rumgro did at SCG, distribution of a vaccine at a time of peril with the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, your book is timely and inspiring, and I'm really excited to read about all those amazing stories. And I think as leaders, when times get tough, we need stories of people who are pushing through and not letting the crisis overwhelm us, and saying, how can we actually make a difference in this time? So I find that very, really powerful. So another couple of questions for you, John, as we get close to wrapping up. This is your 11th book, and we spoke before I pressed recording about a novel. So your novel, I spoke about mine, you spoke about yours. So tell me a little bit about this novel that you are revisiting, and what's your intention for it?
Oh, so it's what a difficult question. So in effect, the novel, I'm going to set it up very simply. There's a protagonist and an antagonist, right? You got to have some sort of tension set of characters in there. But it's about a group of people who go through, I kind of write from my own experiences, but they're not real, but they're based on things I saw, and of course, exaggerated through a novelistic sense. But it's a group of graduate students who go to school together, and as they go throughout their careers, they take remarkably different trajectories. Some are forced for good people to play a little bit off radical business, but more importantly, they pursue the honest good path, and some go down a much darker path. But en route to both of those paths, it's difficult to determine who went which way, and there's a series of conflicts that occur in the course of the book that make you question which actually is the antagonist and which is the protagonist in the book. The ultimate resolution at the end is what I'm wrestling with right now, because they have a fairly sizable conflagration that leads to a bunch of toxic consequences. And I haven't figured out how to go from the maelstrom of craziness going on into a concluding narrative that says to people, oh, okay, it's been resolved. It's set mostly in Silicon Valley and places like that. So.
Okay, cool. So when can we expect to see it?
Well, now you're putting pressure on me. So I guess I'll try to set a commitment to get it done within the next 10 months. I'd like to do that.
Yeah, how exciting. Well, it is a big leap to go from nonfiction-based writing to writing fiction. It's like going back to the beginning again, right? In terms of your writing, it's a whole new experience to move through. So I'm pretty excited for you. And it sounds like there's a lot to be learned in your novel as you write it in terms of how people can think about life journeys and choices and what it means.
I hope so. We'll see. You'll have to tell me when it comes out. Tell me if it's rubbish or good.
Oh, for sure. I always value other writers' perspectives on writing. So I can't wait to read it. I think it'll be a blast. John, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been really inspiring for me and hopefully for our listeners as well in terms of how we can be a force for positive influence in the times of crisis that we're in right now, and how there is a groundswell of leadership and leaders around the world that are actually moving on this and wanting to affect billions and billions of lives for positive outcomes. So thank you so much.
Oh, Zoe, thank you too. I really enjoyed the conversation. I could talk to you forever. This is really fun.
So I was particularly moved by that interview. John was incredibly inspiring, full of energy, full of great positive news stories about businesses really thinking about their contribution and the difference they can make. And that's the kind of leadership we need right now, right? We've got to have leaders who are willing to look at the bigger picture and to think, how can we help? How can we be of service? How can we be an impact unicorn? Seriously, that really had tears in my eyes. How can we affect 1 billion lives for good? And what is the problem that we want to solve? And what's our skill set that we can apply to that? And how can we build a business that is in service to solving that problem for making a difference in the world? I mean, wow. And the other piece of inspiration for me was that it's not just a few people on the leading edge that are shining light. It is more and more and more people doing it. In fact, that is becoming the norm. And that if you do not have a purpose-driven business that is doing good for people and planet, then you're going to be left behind. And that is really, the tide has turned. And that is incredibly energizing for me. So I am so excited by all of that. I'm looking forward to reading John's book, Radical Business, How to Transform Your Organization in the Age of Global Crisis. And I'm looking forward to his novel. So no doubt it's going to be powerful and exciting to read. Hopefully as much as mine will be. So my novel is now with the typesetter. We should be getting back our advanced reader's copy. My novel, The Olympus Project, that is. If you're interested in getting advance notice of when the first editions will be ready, so the collector's edition, which will come out before the main launch, then sign up on our website. Just go to zoerouth.com, click on books, and you can find our blurb on the Olympus Project, and we'll give you advance notice of when the book is available. Yeehaw, very exciting. Also, if you are finding yourself uplifted and you're galvanized to make a difference and you want to change your leadership and change your business, feel free to think about, of course you're free to think about anything you like. I would love for you to consider joining Amplifiers, which is our program for seasoned and experienced leaders who are wanting to amplify the difference that they're making. They want bigger impact and better results for a bigger impact. If that's you and you want to learn the technical skills of how to do that in the company of like-minded leaders and be inspired to take radical action and transform yourself and your business, then join us. Amplifiers, you can find us on our website, zoerouth.com. Click on programs and you'll find Amplifiers there. Or send me an email, zoe@zoerouth.com. Love to hear your feedback, your questions, your observations, your insights. It makes this podcast more of a conversation, more of an exploration, because I know that you have a lot to contribute. I'd love to hear your stories too. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.